In our last lesson, we saw how David and Johnathan were in covenant, and Johnathan laid his life on the line for David. And now we're going to see how David now looks after Jonathan's children because of the covenant. Let's start off with 1 Samuel chapter 20, verse 42. And Johnathan said to David, "Go in peace, for as much as we have sworn both of us in the name of the Lord, saying, The Lord be between me and thee, and between my seed and thy seed forever." And he arose and departed, and Johnathan went into the city. I want you to take note there that this covenant that Johnathan and David made together wasn't just between themselves, but it involved their children and their children's children and their offspring forever. And that covenant was made before the Lord. And the Lord honors a covenant. We're going to pick up today in 2 Samuel chapter 9. A lot has happened since we left David and Johnathan in our last lesson. First of all, Jonathan's been married. He's had children. And him and his father have both been killed in battle. And now David has become the king. And we're going to pick it up there in 2 Samuel chapter 9 and verse 3. The king said, "Is there not still someone of the house of Saul to whom I may show the unfailing, unsought, and unlimited mercy and kindness of God?" Ziba replied, "Johnathan has yet a son who is lame in his feet." And the king said, "Where is he?" Ziba replied, "He is in the house of Machir, son of Amiel, in Lo-Debar." I want to just pause there for a moment. You see here that now that Johnathan has become king, his first act was to see if there was anyone in Jonathan's family that he could honor, anyone that he could honor the covenant that he had made with Johnathan. And he discovers that Johnathan did have a son. And it so happens that when Johnathan and his father were killed in battle, that the king's servants rushed to take Jonathan's son out of the palace. And in so doing, somehow, an accident occurred. And Jonathan's son became lame in both of his feet. And they rushed him out of the palace. Why? Because everyone knows that when a new king takes over, that he has all the children and all the heirs of the previous king. He wants them to be killed and destroyed because he doesn't want any threat of his leadership. He doesn't want anyone to have any right to take over his throne. That's what typically would happen when a new king would take over. However, in this case, Johnathan does not honor tradition. He honors the covenant that he swore with Johnathan in the sight of the Lord. And the covenant, the purpose of our study today is to show that when God makes covenant with man, that no matter what tradition, no matter what comes up, God will keep his covenant. He will keep his word. So David discovers that Johnathan had a son in Lo-Debar. What a place to be in. They rushed Jonathan's son out of the palace and took him to somewhere where they thought no one would find him. He didn't have his own home. He didn't have a little palace he was staying in. Rather, he was staying in someone else's house in the city of Lo-Debar. Debar means pasture. It can mean word or it can mean thing. And when you put lo in front of Debar, the lo, it makes it negative. So we find Mephibosheth living in a place of no pasture, of no word, and of no thing or nothing. He left a palace where he had everything and was brought to a place where he had nothing. So David says to his servants, "Find Mephibosheth and bring him to me." I can just imagine when the king's servants were pounding on the door and Mephibosheth hears the conversation that they have come for him, that King David has sent for him. I imagine he was thinking he's going to be humiliated. He may even be killed. He's been found out. He's been living in this place of no pasture. He's been hiding in shame with nothing. And he's brought before David in the palace. And what happens? Well, while he's expecting to be killed, rather, he's going to be saved. And why is he going to be saved? Because of a promise, because of a covenant that David made with Johnathan, even before Mephibosheth was born. Mephibosheth likely didn't even know that there was a covenant there. He didn't go into David's presence saying, remember the covenant. No, he went there as a humble servant. Let's read on. In verse 6 it said, And Mephibosheth, son of Johnathan, the son of Saul, came to David and fell on his face and did obeisance. David said, Mephibosheth, and he answered, Behold, your servant. And David said to him, Fear not, for I will surely show you kindness for your Johnathan your father's sake, and will restore to you all the land of Saul your father or grandfather, and you shall eat of my table always. And the cripple bowed himself and said, What is your servant, that you should look upon such a dead dog as I am? We see here now Mephibosheth in the presence of the king, expecting most likely to be put to death. And rather than being put to death, Johnathan says, Because I am remembering the covenant, I'm going to take you from a land of no pasture, a place of nothing. You lived as a refugee, but now I'm going to bring you into my kingdom and into my house. And you're going to eat at the king's table. I'm taking you from nothing into the kingdom. This so much represents what God has done for you and I through Jesus Christ. He's taking us from nothing, from the kingdom of darkness, and brought us into his kingdom, into his palace. And he has promised by a covenant that he will look after us, that he will be there for us, and that we will never be with nothing ever again. If we put our faith in him, as long as we will eat at his table, he will protect us. And not only does David invite him into the kingdom and into his house to eat, but he restores to him all the land that belonged to King Saul. Let's read again. In verse 9, Then the king called to Ziba, Saul's servant, and said to him, I have given your master's son or grandson all that belonged to Saul and to all his house, and you shall till the land for him, you, your sons, and your servants, and you shall bring in the produce, that your master's heir may have food to eat. But Mephibosheth, your master's son, shall eat always at my table. Now Ziba had 15 sons and 20 servants. So we see here the promise of King David honoring the covenant, not just honoring it with Johnathan, but now, after Jonathan's long gone, Jonathan's dead, and yet he reaches out to Jonathan's heir so that he can fulfill the covenant, the promise that he made to Johnathan. And he not only brings him into his kingdom, he restores all the land that King Saul had. He restores it back to Mephibosheth. And Mephibosheth is a crippled, remember. So not only does he restore him all the land, but he commands Ziba. And Ziba, we're told, has 20 sons and many servants. Why are we told that? Because it reinforces the fact that Ziba and his family will be able to well look after Mephibosheth and make sure that all of his land and all of his produce is harvested. In our next study, we're going to be looking at what I think is the most important covenant in the whole Bible, and that is a covenant that God himself makes with mankind.